Now, before the crisis hit, the mainstream really didn't have a seriously developed macroeconomics. Instead, the mainstream accepted Say's law, which is this argument that general gluts or general slumps are impossible, and that crises, when they occurred, are due to disproportionality, one sector being output too high and prices too low, another one vice versa. So if you have, according to this argument, you could have excess supply in one market, but there therefore had to be excess demand in the others. And the solution to the crisis was to let the prices of the commodities which were in excess supply fall. So for example, if wages were, if unemployment existed, then wages were too high, so if you let wages fall, unemployment will fall as well. So they both go in the same direction. The argument being behind this version of macroeconomics that money was just an intermediary. Nobody actually wanted to acquire money. People sell only to buy something again, so what they're doing by being in the market is simply trying to increase their utility by selling products they currently own, which give them lower utility than the ones they wish to buy, so they improve their utility. That's the only reason you trade, and that therefore means that each person's supply generates their demand. So you go to the market with goods to sell because you wish to buy. That's the only reason you've gone to the market. You're not trying to accumulate money or anything foolish like that. Given this argument, the sum of all supply therefore can't exceed the sum of all demand, because fundamentally supply generates demand. And therefore when you have a slump, it can occur in one market, but that's because the supply of that particular market, I call it X, exceeds the demand at the prices the producers are trying to get. But if the price of X falls, demand for X will rise and you'll get back to equilibrium again. Of course, unless governments and nasty things like monopolies and trade unions get in the way. Now, this is Say's argument about it, and Say, writing in France in the early 1800s, wrote what he called a catechism of political economy, where he was effectively having a dialogue with a dumb but intelligent person, uninformed but intelligent person asking questions and him giving the answers. So he started off by saying that the more purchasers produce, the more they have to purchase with. So the more supply there is, the more demand there will be. In other words, supply generates demand. You don't have any issues about whether demand's sufficient. And his intelligent but uninformed questioner comes back and says, it appears to me that if buyers only purchase by means of their products, they have generally more products than money to offer in payment, so there's going to be a shortage of money. Now here is Say's dismissal of this argument in a way that dismisses the importance of money in a way that you can still find neoclassical economists arguing today. So he said each producer asks for money in exchange for his products only for the purpose of employing that money again immediately in the purchase of another product. For we do not consume money, and it is not sought after in ordinary cases to conceal it. Thus, when a producer desires to exchange his product for money, he may be considered as already asking for the merchandise which he proposes to buy with this money. It is thus that producers, though they have all of them the air of demanding money for their goods, do in reality demand merchandise for their merchandise. So nobody's in capitalism for money. Sorry, Donald, you've got it all wrong. Well, let's put a few question marks here. Only for the purpose of using the money again. What about wanting to accumulate wealth? Immediately? Aren't there time lags in the system? Don't people put money aside for a rainy day, etc., etc.? It is not sought after in ordinary cases to conceal the money you're trying to accumulate. Okay. And then finally down here, they don't actually want money, they simply want goods. Nobody's trying to accumulate money. I'd like to hear a Marxist take on that. Of course, I know exactly what that would be. And then finally says, yes, without doubt, the more merchandise that's produced, the more demand there'll be for merchandise. So there's never a problem with demand, it's always a problem with supply. And of course, this is still the mentality that dominates neoclassical economics today. Now, one thing I find strange in the history of economic thought is that this was accepted as an argument against the possibility of general gluts, even by the classical school, people like Ricardo, where the classical school had a completely different theory of value to the neoclassical school, which Say effectively was a precursor to. Because Say believed that utility and increasing utility was the source of value. The neoclassicals rejected that, so the classicals rejected that quite explicitly, and Ricardo would say the measure of value is the amount of labour that goes into producing a commodity. So they have a totally different theory of value, and yet here is Ricardo quite happily accepting Say's arguments as to why there can't be a general glut. So there's no amount of capital which cannot be employed because demand is limited only by production. So the belief dominated the mainstream. Of course, Marx didn't agree, but he was an outlier clearly. The mainstream believed that aggregate demand could not be insufficient because to them aggregate supply was aggregate demand, and you'll still find this case being made today. Sellers only sell in order to buy again immediately, that sort of argument. Now, of course, when the crisis first hit into 1929 or 1930, the mainstream reaction was, oh well, apart from the stock market crash, the fact that there's rising unemployment must be because wages are too high. So if you cut wages, the crisis will come to an end. Well, a slight empirical problem there. Wages did fall and the crisis got worse. When you take a look at the money wages and real wages over the whole period, from 1929 on, money wages were falling. In fact, they fell between 1929 and 1932. Money wages fell by over 30%. Now, real wages fell less because there was deflation going on rather than inflation, but for the entire period of the right to the 1939 almost, money wages were below the level they were back in 1929, and they were falling all the way through to 1932-33, and real wages only rose because of that decline in prices there. But sorry, we had this, the mainstream would say that if you have unemployment, then the solution is to drop wages. Well, wages dropped and unemployment rose. They're not supposed to go in opposite directions according to the mainstream way of thinking. So that's one problem. Here's looking at the growth rates, by the way, starting from 1 year after my empirical data there, the data for the absolute level, so I can undo the change over a year, 1 year later. And you can see that nominal wages fell as much as 16% in 1932. Then there was a period of rising wages, which actually coincided with rising employment, and then finally, again, we have another dose of the Roosevelt recession. You're going to have falling nominal wages and rising unemployment. Again, the opposite of what mainstream thought, and it happened twice. It wasn't just once back here. It happened a second time in 1937.